Performance deals are very good if you have good clay. I think that cannot be overstated. There is more importance, or more importance should be placed on the raw material you are working with than your skill. At best, your skill is a force multiplier.
James Schramko here. Welcome back to my podcast. This is episode 1092, and today we're having a chat about owner psychology and performance deals. So there's not many people on the planet that I could have this exact conversation with, so I'd love to welcome Rob Hanley to the call. G'day, Rob.
Hey, mate. Great to be back.
Yeah, we had a great series about 4 years ago, and it was in the 700s there, like 762, 763, around about there. There was three of them. And they're up there on podcast catches. Someone's curious about it. We had a big impact at the time because you'd shared some cheat sheet and I said, let's podcast about it. We did, and it was a great little series. And I recently polled my audience. I said, okay, who do you want to have on the show? They said, oh, I'd love to have Rob Hanley. In fact, that was Adrius Garcia. So thank you, Adrius, for your suggestion. And here is Rob as per your request.
Hello, Adrius. Thanks for throwing my name into the ring. It's always good to have an excuse to catch up with James, especially when it has been so long since we've done it in person. Because we haven't had our little annual meetup at DY for a coffee.
It's harder to do these days because I'm not often in DY. I was there about a month ago.
Yep.
But you're overseas, of course. You're in Europe right now?
Yeah, I'm in Europe at the moment. I'm currently in Belgium, and normally Portugal is home. So much harder to meet for a casual coffee in DY these days.
Well, what I'm suggesting is that we have our little virtual coffee catch-up today and let people sort of eavesdrop in, because when we do catch up, there's always sort of this knowledge information exchange. You've been off out into the wilderness for 4 years. I've been doing my own thing. It'd be really interesting to compare notes. These are topics we're both familiar with. So I think it's kind of like a peer-to-peer discussion and a share out loud. But for context, let's just have a little recap. I don't know if you've been up to much different in the last few years, Rob, but last time we caught up, you were helping clients organize themselves, get better financials, figure out better business models to make more profit. You had a little hand in some performance-based deals and looking at different structures there. So you were running kind of a parallel course to the sorts of things that I was up to. So I'm just curious, are you still doing the same stuff?
Yeah, so I took a bit of time off and basically serviced the existing client base last year as my family grew. So I was really happy to be able to take advantage of the time. And other than servicing those existing clients, it was really just a little lower gear. But before that, I think we spoke in 2020. So one of the things that came through in 2021 was a performance deal that I did on an equity basis. Obviously worked with a handful of clients. I did some one-off sort of one-day turnarounds as well, or one-day deep dives. And that was with like a French supplement company. I worked with a publisher out of Spain, all sorts of stuff. So very similar, but still very heavy on that one-to-one basis, which was really suitable for that stage of my life.
Nice. Well, it gives you lots of experience in the trenches and certainly qualified to talk about them. As you know, performance deals are pretty hard to predict. You can narrow down the chances of it going off the rails, but you never really know where it'll go. In my world, in the last 4 years, I guess I've added a couple and I've reduced a couple. I've had a few mature. Recently, one of my performance deals sold the business and I get a payout, which is great. I had another one of those a year or so back, which was awesome. There was another one that didn't quite work, so I just stopped it. And the rest of them are just sort of getting stronger and more mature as time goes on. I think we've sort of just crossed over 9 years of these deals. So it turns out they actually provide more than half my income, and the other half is just mentoring and some affiliate stuff. So along the way, though, I guess I'm actually dealing with the least amount of business owners that I've ever dealt with because of not having the 580 community members in my lower tier now. I've got substantially less people in that tier. I haven't sold it all this year, but there's still a bunch of people in there that I service because they've been great members, and we still have a monthly call. And I guess if people tried to come in, they could still get access to it, but it's not been my focus. So these topics are really interesting to me because often the business forces owners to really confront personal patterns and behaviors. And we're often hearing about Elon Musk and Zuckerberg, and we did hear a lot of examples of Steve Jobs. It seems that the founder and their personal behaviors and patterns are definitely going to translate across to the business. Your thoughts on that, Rob?
Oof, yeah, right in the deep end. Look, it is fascinating to me to watch the impact of personal psychology on a business. And I think that there's two parts to it. The first part is that you can often hide from those psychological factors. Especially online businesses, there's so much automation, there is so much software at play that you actually are able to avoid a lot of the things that might trigger a negative reaction. Or you have more of an insurance policy, maybe buffer, however you want to phrase it. And it's really fascinating because it means that the pattern can continue. So one client I mentioned to you, as we were talking about, had issues with firing people. Now, you and I both, we've talked about it before, that idea of, train, transfer, terminate. Like, if you have someone and you've invested in bringing them on board and bringing them into your culture, you think they're a good fit, maybe you're wrong, you still want to see maybe that's a better spot for them. And that's okay. And there's a real gradual process. But with him, I would notice this almost 4-month pattern. And it takes years to see these things crop up, right? Because it's a slower feedback loop. But something would happen. And then he would not give the feedback he needed to give the staff member. He wouldn't develop them properly and he'd feel guilty. And then they'd continue making mistakes. And then he'd feel bad that he didn't tell them the feedback earlier. And eventually he'd start to get frustrated. Then he'd get resentful. Then he'd be like, I got to fire this person. And it would just happen after 4 months. It would be like a shock to them. And the first time it happened, I was like, okay, this is a bit of a surprise to the guy. This is not common. We've never seen this before, and it was new. And he was in a very rapidly scaling business from being a service provider himself into a more educational and publishing-based business. The second time we saw that pattern, I was like, hang on, this seems familiar, right? Like, just flagging this. And the third time, I was like, listen, we've gone down this road before. Now you get to choose. Do you want to take 4 months and have the same outcome that we have every time? Or do you want to go, okay, this is a pattern that I have around guilt, about rejection, about hurting people, all these things, whatever it might be, and address it. On the flip side, I had another one where a client of mine, look, I'm not trying to be mysterious by not saying people's names.
Well, I think it's okay.
Not
it's
in,
okay. You need to create a safe
I just want to
space for
be
the people that you
exactly. Yeah, and I just want to flag that for everyone, right? Because I think it's easy for you to hear all these stories and be like, yeah, but who? And for me, it's exactly that. It's a safe space. Like, if someone tells me something, I'm not going to go broadcast around the world. But yeah, and I flag it for this next one because I had a client who would constantly hire someone who was reminiscent of a family member, right? They had the same archetype. And the way in which he related to the people he would hire into these roles, it was like he was trying to undo a past relationship. And these were revenue generating roles. And the people he would hire were completely ill equipped and undermanaged, I guess. And watching him, it really came down to even their body shape, the way they conducted themselves, their background in terms of ethnicity, all these factors where if I was to describe this person to you, you would say, that's a horrible role. That's horrible for that role. It just doesn't make any sense. But he would go and make this hiring. And I watched this happen a few times, and it was just sort of devastating to watch someone, what I would call squander opportunity, because that emotional piece was too big. And his business was far less online. It was one of the more tangible businesses I've worked with, quote unquote, real world. And you could really see that he didn't have that buffer that protected him from himself, if you will. So I know that's a bit of a rambly answer, but I really think that all of us have shit, for want of a better term, in our system. It doesn't matter how you cut it. We've all got, whether it's patterns of behavior or triggers or traumas or whatever phrasing, ultimately creating cognitive distortions. And one of the beautiful things about business, if you are in a business that has less buffer, where you're really connecting with the rubber meets the road, is you get the opportunity to experience those things and then either shy away from them, run away from them, or you can choose to confront them. And you can do that on your own with a therapist, with a coach, whatever it is. But I think that's a really fascinating element. And it's really not talked about a lot. And then just to throw one more thing in, which I'd be curious actually, because you've worked with such a broader scope of business owners, especially in the group stuff. I can't get over this fascinating pattern I've seen emerge, which is all business owners, or not all, but many business owners seem to be seeking the love of their father. I cannot express this enough. It is mind-boggling. I've had more conversations than I care to count with entrepreneurs. I had one like 3 days ago. A guy called me, and it really came down to like, he's worried what his dad will think. This guy is nearly 50. He has kids. He has a very successful business. And his frustrations were rooted in, what would dad think? It's like, bro, you've blown past your dad. You've like on every measure conceivable. And I find that to be this other really fascinating things, like what are you chasing in a business? Is it validation? Is it security? Is it the love of your father? And to be fair, just so entrepreneurs listening to this know you're not alone, I have some friends in the special forces, and one of them said to me, yeah, it's really funny that you say that because in the special forces, we joke, all of us are looking for the love of our mother. Like we're all driven by something. And sometimes it is that perception that, hey, if I just get this thing perfect, then dad will love me or mum will love me. I find it fascinating.
I think it comes back to that Charles Hanal thing, the mental keys, mental chemistry, that your outside world is a reflection of your inside world. And people are creating and repeating traumas, especially. They keep putting them back. Adlerian philosophy is, he says, hey, traumas don't have to exist. You could stop bringing them back from the past and putting them back in front of you again. And the deeper I went into this, I had other guests like Jamin Fraser on here, and he was talking about that there's always a payoff when there's a negative behaviour. When people are doing things that are negative, there's a payoff. So if people keep hiring their mum, maybe they're getting to spend some more time with that adoring affection of a mother. If they're doing things to please their dad, then maybe they're getting some comfort from the fact that they're moving closer towards a position where they could feel like they're enough or have approval or be validated. I also see that, and a lot of gurus have stated that. I think Hormozi talks about his dad a fair bit. It probably drove a lot of his behavior. Warren Buffett's talked about in a documentary that he thinks money is how you keep score. So there's some deep-rooted thing in his mind that you need to have more money to win the game. So I questioned a lot, actually. I was out there doing some river crossings in the Fall Drive on the weekend in the bush, and I was thinking, right now, someone's working this weekend. They're working right now on a computer, and they think they're winning, but I think they're probably not winning. I think it's like they're putting off, well, either they'll never experience some of the things that I've experienced, like the trips and the outdoors and the adventures and living, spending time with family. They're either going to do it in the future or not at all. And so that would be incomplete for me. It takes massive courage to let go of the need to please others. That's really the thing that hampers people, isn't it? And back to the psychology of the owner, there's a very good chance that the people who are trying to build an empire are trying to cover up a perceived shortcoming. Because I think there's a number, right, of how much money you actually need to have a reasonable life. I don't know what it is, probably tens of millions, 12 million or 20 million. But after 20-something million, if you were to invest that in some kind of interest-bearing safety stock bond thing or whatever, or a little bit into crypto or whatever, you should have enough to live off. So you're doing it for some other reason beyond that.
I did this actually the other day. Is I sat down and I kind of future projected what, based on certain numbers that I have at hand, what we need. And the number is actually far less than I would have ever predicted in terms of cash flow per year. And then when you back that out and look at the tools that you have at your disposal, I realized that that's actually a much smaller number than I thought. And it really is, God, if you get to 20 million invested in 5%, like you're done. Like you can be done. Let me rephrase that. You can be done. And this is a bit of a tangent, but I came across a podcast recently called The Art of Accomplishment. John McIntyre mentioned it to me on the phone last week. And he gave me this episode called Business as a Spiritual Practice. And I have been banging on about this to everyone. I think it really aligns with what we're talking about. And it's this idea of, first of all, using business as a way to see yourself, sort of like yoga is a practice, surfing can be a practice, having a child can be a practice, whatever.
That's why people get so unhappy when they sell their business, because they've made the business their identity.
Yeah. And that's it. It's not a tool. It is, right? And I think that was something that really struck me and made me reflect on my own psychology, right? Like none of us are perfect. And I was like, how often have I chased a position of done so that I don't have to deal with money anymore? Whereas I might be better served by, enduring the pain, for want of a better term, embracing parts of the suck that I may have avoided. What parts am I avoiding? Because I saw this pattern play out in my strength training, where I used to do really hardcore gung-ho training, but I get injured every, 16 weeks, 18 weeks. And then I adjusted to something that was still effective, still improving, but I haven't had an injury since I started it. And then you just have these opportunities to reflect and say, okay, like, where am I avoiding things in my psychology? Or how might the way I be acting is a way of avoidant or story that doesn't serve me. And I think it can be really difficult to get that gap and go, hang on, I'm actually not my thoughts, to really get into the test, like, I'm not my thoughts. So if that's a thought I'm having, whether it is, oh, I have to hit 20 million in the bank. Well, what if that's just not true? What if I decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to work forever because I enjoy what I do. Why on earth would I want to stop? I think it's just such an interesting, yet
That's often the
challenging
argument.
thing to
People,
consider.
the 7-day a
Yeah.
weekers, they say that they absolutely love it. And that's fine for them, but they don't have to overlay that on other people, or that doesn't have to become a cult that people worship. And also, your cost of living is going to be much higher if you have to buy all these other things to please people and to impress them so that they look at you and think that you're awesome, which is, if you want to strip it right back down to it, if you look at DNA, the professor of anthropology that I had as a client once explained this to me. He said, we're just DNA that propagates. Our only role is survival. To survive, we need to find a good mate and propagate. To get a good mate, we have to be attractive. That's why we do a lot of the actions that we do, to be attractive to the opposite sex so that we can propagate and further our DNA. It has to come out of us. You don't have kids. It's just DNA that goes off into the world and then looks after itself, right? When he explained this to me, it's like, wow, that kind of explains a lot of human behavior, that it's doing what it needs to do to propagate and to continue and survive. So if you bring it back to that basic instinct, yeah, I think this is the most important thing. Sometimes people are on a track that may not be the ideal path for them because they haven't really stopped to give it much consideration, or they've been indoctrinated into that being the track. And you think about it on even a basic level. I've got kids, but your kids grow up speaking a language, right? Like my kids, most of them grew up speaking English. So that's what they know and that's normal to them. And then another kid somewhere else in the world grows up speaking Italian, or another kid grows up speaking French. Like from the time they're born, they get indoctrinated into their way, and that feels normal and natural to them, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the only way. And so that's really what we're taking away from this, I think, is have a look at the business you've created, and are there reflections of your psychology that might want some adjustment, some fine tuning? If you do have people leaving all the time, perhaps you're repeating a behavior that's not positive for the business. If your business is gotten too big and it's sucking the life and marrow from you, and you keep walking around saying, oh, I wish it was like the old days when it was just me and a couple of clients and low stress, maybe you've built the kind of business that someone else has implanted into you that you think you need to have. And I absolutely want to state this clearly. I'm not telling anyone what kind of business they need, right? Not everyone wants a lifestyle business like me. Some people want to go out there and put a dent in the universe and create amazing, go to Mars, whatever. And that you can't stop them doing that. That's what they want to do. It's their innate motivation, and I believe it, that is like it's a pure intention for them to do that, and that makes them happy. I'm all for that. All I do is support people on what their stated goal is, but I do help them question it if they're unsure. And some of these patterns that you observe are indicators. And I actually had someone on the call this morning. They've got a team member who's repeatedly not doing the things they're supposed to do. And when we really get down to it, they're not being challenged on it because they keep enabling this person because the relationship is compromised through long-term friendship, and they don't want to call it. And so we worked through a framework, actually. Another friend of mine, Lloyd, was on the call, Lloyd Thompson, and he came up with his beer framework. I don't know where he got it from, but it was behavior, state the behavior that's being exhibited. E is expectation. Like, what was the expectation that you had initially that's been not met? Then E is the effect. What's the effect of this now that this has happened? And then R is the result that you're actually seeking. What has to happen as a result of this? Where does it go from here, sort of thing. It's very similar to a feedback framework that we've shared on this show before. But I want to ask you, Rob, what did you advise the person who keeps hiring their mum, or the person who keeps firing someone after 4 months?
Yeah, I mean, in both of them, it's really about this idea of bringing awareness, right? Like a lot of my job, because the way that I work with the clients who I do take on in one-to-one stuff, it's quite intimate, right? Like it's not been uncommon for a client to stick around for years. It's sometimes gone beyond the initial project and then stuck around 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And it means that my role shifts from being much more tactical or specific, if you will, to more like, hey, have you noticed this kind of stuff? With those clients, it was first about bringing awareness to it, like, hey, like, this is a pattern, this has come up, this is repeating, have you noticed this, blah, blah, blah. But also not trying to actually make them change. So one of the things that I made a lot of mistakes with when I was younger, I still have a pattern that I seek to do less and less of, but I still catch myself doing it. And anyone who knows me will know it's true, is that I love telling people what to do. But I have learned that it is actually really ineffective. And it's like this weird, like, if I can sit for 1 minute to 2 minutes and just shut up and just say, hey, man, have you noticed this thing? And if I can just shut up for 2 minutes, they will come to the conclusion by themselves more often than not. And it's weird because it means that you're not actually doing, quote unquote, anything in the way that we're used to doing stuff. But I have found that to be more effective. One of the things that I did last year was I read like 8 versions of The Art of War with different commentaries. And I've come to the conclusion it's probably the worst titled book in the world, because it is not actually a book about waging war and conflict and violence. The vast majority of the book is telling you, don't go to war. It is very costly. It is very expensive. It results in death. It is a miserable thing. And then it teaches you, like, if you have to go into war, do it so you win without fighting. Stack the odds on your side. Like, it's just this constant reiteration. But I had this story, which I've probably told elsewhere, but someone who works for me found themselves in a very unhealthy relationship, like very unhealthy. And it was really affecting them. It was affecting their performance at work. It was affecting their life. And they were trapped, is the only way to describe it. And, at first I tried the reflective thing. And then I tried the sort of coaching thing. And then after a while, because I was starting to get pissed off at this, right? I'm like, you're coming to me with your problems, but I can also see that you're trapped, and I feel a certain kinship towards you and care for you. I'll try the directing. Oh man, the directing, that went down like a sack of shit. And it was pathetic. It didn't work at all. And I'd gotten to this point where I was about to give up. And I went back to my house that evening. And as I was sitting there, I was just chewing on this, because I was like, I know that this is someone who's actually in a very bad position and cannot help themselves in this situation. Like, all the context is wrong. Let me think about the situation they found themselves in. And I ended up reading up on abusive male partners. It's a book called Why Does He Do That? And it's written by a guy, a psychologist, who only works with male abusers of their partners. And in it, it had this one line about the goal of an abuser is to isolate and wear down their partner. And as I read that line, I was sitting there and talked to my partner. I said to her, like, I think I've kind of clocked it. Like, everything that I've been doing is actually supporting his strategy. And Sun Tzu has this whole thing. It's like, don't attack them in their walled city. Don't fight them in the field. Don't even go for their alliances. Undermine the strategy. And I was like, I have been playing into his hand, because he has been sowing this discord between this girl who works for me and myself, constantly and subtly and insidiously. And if I buy it, I'm actually playing into his hand. And so my partner and I spoke about it, and I said, look, here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to call her and say, listen, like, whatever you choose to do, unconditional love and support. Like, whatever you need, I back you. If you stay with a guy, I've got your back. If you leave the guy, I've got your back, whatever you want. And up until this point, she had been convinced they would work it out. About 4 days later, we're having a meeting together, and she says, it's really crazy is up until you said that, I felt like I was stuck. Like, I was always going to be letting someone down. Like, if I did what I knew I should do and you were saying to do, well, then I'd be letting him down. But if I stayed with him, then I'd be letting you and all these friends down. And I mean, the situation was so bad, she hadn't told her family, right? You get the point. And when you said to me that no matter what you would do, you would love and support me, all of a sudden there was space. I was like, oh my God, it's okay. And then I could suddenly see everything. And from an outside point of view, me not trying to fix things, me just shutting up and being like, cool. All of a sudden, I opened this space, this cascade of activity. And very soon after, she was free. She was done. She was clean. And we have talked about that together many times, because it was one of those like mystical moments where I didn't do anything, but it was effective. And I've just seen that play out more times, especially as I've gotten older. And probably because I'm less of an aggressive person, or I hope I am, where me doing less has more impact. Not to too much steal the title of your book, but doing less has made more.
It's actually written here, less but better. a lot could be said for the pause in a sales scenario. But you've brought a few things to my mind. Firstly, the last time I really went deep into the art of war was when I was in a dysfunctional relationship between a crazy psycho boss who threatened to kill me with a steak knife.
As you do.
Spat on me. And I was trapped because I was tied to my income from this one place. So obviously I had to go and get another job. But that be like water was one of the big takeaways for me from the art of war. To change form, move around it. It speaks quite well to your point of not having to address everything, just escape it, just go around it, right? If you come across an obstacle, just move past it. If you turn into steam, turn into rain, turn into ice, you can be quite fluid in your shape and form. The second thing that it reminds me of is the Socratic method of teaching, which is asking questions rather than answering. If you answer people or give them solutions, sometimes they don't really learn how to come up with their own solutions. They just rely on you for the answer. And I learned it early on, thanks to Caroline Plunkett in about 1991, when I asked her the dealer code for one of the Holden dealers in Lakemba. She said, look it up. I said, but you know what it is. She goes, yeah, but if I tell you, then you'll just keep asking me. But if you know where to look it up, then you'll never ask me again. And I'm like, wow, what a bitch.
I mean, the fact you can still remember her name 30 years later is
she
huge.
did me a huge favor. I got that lesson very early, and I learnt the lesson. And, it's actually in the last few years, I was talking to Jamin Fraser, and he said, as a coach, you don't want to have that friendship or give them the impression that you care about them, because then they're compromised to you, and that actually doesn't give them a safe space to operate. And you just described that perfectly. When you've let them off the hook and said, whatever happens, it's fine, she's now not compromised by wanting to please you. If someone wants to please the coach, then they're compromised from their true course. Something to that effect.
So this is really interesting, just the way you phrased it. I actually thought about doing a therapy degree after working with all these business owners, like actually going and getting all the certificates and the psych and digging into it. And I spoke to a therapist I used to work with, and I said to him, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. And he knows a lot about how I actually work. Like, I've gone out with clients for cigars and had a bunch of drinks and then basically bullied them into a realization, and they've gone and made a lot of money afterwards. Whereas other clients, I've had a much more arm's distance thing. And I said to him, yeah, like, I'm thinking about doing this. And he said, look, you can't do this, because the things that you do to engage or enact transformation in people is either not allowed within the psychological governing groups, or whatever you want to call it, or is something that's not studied well enough to encourage people to do it. But if you are willing to trust yourself essentially in pursuing these things and maybe pushing this boundary or stepping back in a stage when, as a therapist, you shouldn't, it seems to work, right? So don't do the degree; you will be hamstrung.
And
I think that's sort of this.
Don't get great results according to some of the people with alternative techniques. I've had people like Marissa Peer on the show, and she has a book called.
What does she do? Sorry, what's her thing?
She can fix people better than people who have gone to therapists for years, and she's got a book called I Am Enough. She's very popular, a popular Mind Valley product as well.
Okay.
Very smart lady, really lovely lady, great interview. Yeah, she said they're really not that effective, some of them. So I think just keep doing what you're doing. There's no question, as encountering business owners, it's a massive mental game. There's no doubt about it.
Oh,
and
I honestly, James, I would go so far as to say that if I was to sit down and do a ruthlessly honest self-assessment of every success I'd had and every failure I'd had, and there's both on each side, plenty, every time I have made a mistake, the vast majority of those have been mistakes of cognitive distortion, not of bad decisions, if that makes sense. Like, it's really been an emotional thing. It's crazy.
I've got the Bible here on my desk, Charlie
Charlie's
Almanac. Like, I'm just constantly in pursuit of material on this stuff, but I also have so much time for reflection these days that I'm hopefully in the Yoda state now, where I'm really helping a lot of Luke Skywalkers make good choices. Yeah. So I feel like
I think it's great.
I feel like we've covered the psychology side a fair bit.
Yeah.
Let's talk, while I've got you, about performance deals, because there's not that many people doing performance deals or talking about it publicly. Of course, some industries are famous for it: the movie industry, the shoe industry, the copywriting industry, artists to some extent, musicians, so forth. But in the business world, there is an appeal of performance-based deals as an alternative to things like retainers. There is that potential of the no risk for the party who is getting help, where they only pay if a result comes and they don't pay if a result doesn't come. From the provider's perspective, and in this case, you and me probably, in a lot of the cases, the downside would be that if we don't get the result for whatever reason, it's generally not because we're not good. It's often because of something else, either an outside market force or the client doesn't implement or we haven't filtered correctly. There can be a downside that you're wasting time and energy and not getting the outcome. But when the outcome comes, it can just be so disproportionate to a retainer that it's terrific, and you can get a phantom equity or actual equity depending on how you structure things. But I'd love to know what your experiences have been with performance deals. Maybe look at some positives and some negatives.
Why don't I give a couple different ones, then we can just talk about those specific structures or deals.
Yeah,
because I think that just makes it easier to riff on. So I have been a profit share partner where I handled all the marketing and marketing material, scripting, telling them what to shoot, how to say it, all to the point of telling them what inflection to use on each word. Right? I mean, like anally controlled. So I was a profit share partner in that. And then also I've been an equity / obviously profit share partner, but an equity partner in a publishing company. I've brokered joint venture deals where I've connected people. I've also been the one managing an ongoing deal. And I've drawn a lot as I've looked at these things. Jay Abraham, similar to you, was a big influence. It was the first person I heard about say, hey, give me $1. And if I give you $1, will you give me 20 cents? If I give you $1 you didn't have before, would you give me 20 cents? I loved it. But then as I learned more about the royalties industry as a whole, I find that really fascinating. Because it actually changes it changes the way that you look at things and the way you make an argument for them. So yeah, those are 4 before I kind of get onto a train of thought. But I had a performance deal. It was in health and fitness. I've had a bunch of them actually. I did the medical publishing company. I did brokering deals and then managed broker deals. So why don't we talk about those 4 to get started?
Go for it.
All right. So performance deals are very good if you have good clay. I think that cannot be overstated. There is more importance, or more importance should be placed on the raw material you are working with than your skill. At best, your skill is a force multiplier. We used to have a phrase in advertising when I was in it 13 years ago, which was, you can't polish a turd. And it really is a visceral image. But it's true. Like no matter how good you are as a marketer, if you have a crap product or a crap offer, just forget it. It won't work. And one of the lessons I had to learn was I had a couple of really good deals back to back, and I thought I had the golden touch. I put it on me. I thought I was the thing. And then you have a couple of crap ones. You're like, hang on, but what about my magic? And it's this real cognitive dissonance, to rip things around. The second thing is,
you mentioned that.
Oh, sorry.
Some of my best partners, they're so good and so talented. I just think, God, they must sometimes wonder, like, what am I actually doing to help this? Because they're just so good. But then we get on a call or whatever, and they're giving me glowing flattery and encouragement. They make me feel special, and it's like, we each feel that way about the other. It's a good match. But, it's such an important thing, what you just said, that you should be the force multiplier, that the quality of the raw ingredients are critical. And that if I look at, I've done about 16 deals and I ended up with I think I've got 7 now, and about 3 have sold and the rest I turned off, which is like, that's kind of the ratio after 9 years. And the ones that I turned off that didn't work, I chose the wrong raw material, I guess, in hindsight, or except for one where it was an outside market force that was just insane. He got absolutely flamed and trashed and destroyed very unfairly by some absolute dickhead who was definitely had daddy issues. He's one of those like almost internet troll types who goes out to take people down for feel goods. And my client got caught up in that really unfairly. And I told my client how to recover, but he didn't follow the actions. So it just turned the deal to nothing.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard part, right? Is there's also stages in the life cycle of a deal, right? Like life cycle of anything, but
Seasonal.
when it's early, it's seasonal and it's exciting at the start, right? And then you see the early stuff, but when
Might be
you come
exciting for the other
across,
party. It's like a lot of hard work in the beginning, inevitably.
yeah, but I think it's that case that there comes a point when the dream has become a reality. And I think this is one of the things I learned, that arm's distance piece is at the end of the day, you're not actually seeking to build, call it a relationship, because I personally feel like that word has a lot of weight, a lot of intimacy associated. You are looking to have a contractual arrangement with another individual where you are providing something that improves in a meaningful way their business. Now, in some relationships, that thing that you are providing may be a container for them to explore things, a sounding board, an advisor, a non equity holding peer, whatever you want to call it. In other places, such as the deal I brokered together for a couple of people, is I am connecting one person with a client they didn't have, and I'm connecting a client who couldn't figure out or didn't have the insight, the willingness, the capabilities, whatever it is, to scale their business using a paid advertising platform. And by putting those people together and having the performance marketer be a pure performance marketer where they take a percentage of net sales, after you make money, they make money. In that case, my role is that I've connected you two with an opportunity you didn't have. It's up to you two to continue facilitation, and I'll check in, but it's not very structured. And I think it's worth understanding that in those more brokering deals, which are the dream for some people, right? For me as well, like who doesn't want easy stuff when you made everyone's lives better? You get a kickback, life's good. But most people, A, don't realize how rare they are. Like it is difficult to find them. You're not going to get out there and just suddenly have 100 of them at your door. But they're also very different to the deals that you need to do to understand how to do those, which is you have to get your feet wet, your hands dirty, whatever it is. Like you really got to get in there. And I think a good example of that is the medical publishing company. So the medical publishing company that I partnered on, the partner on that was a physician. He understood the audience. He understood the market. He found an incredible opportunity. Like the guy saw that we could take a product that was still being sold on DVDs and in ring binder manuals at the back of an in-person event, had no online presence, and we could publish it online. It was perfect. It was a setup, a layup, whatever you want to call it. And I'd known the guy for a few years and he knew what I could do. He'd seen some of that stuff. But over time, we either through our inability to communicate clearly, our own shit in our head, or just totally different values, whatever it was. I'm not going to talk shit about the guy on a podcast. It was that we just clearly could not work together anymore. Just things were said, and I got to this point where I was like, I'm done. I'm out. Like, you're not the kind of person who I would like to spend time with. I do not want you in my life. Those are not, at the time I had no kids, but it would be today, I would say, that's not the behavior I want around my children. And if I don't want that behavior around my children, why do I want it around me?
I thought you were going to say kids have changed your paradigm of how much pain and tolerance you have to exist. I mean, don't you learn a lot when you have kids about human beings?
So much.
The absolute ultimate manipulators, the most powerful. Like they actually, back to your lesson before, they are the perfect example of someone who does nothing and you do absolutely everything. Right?
I mean, look, my kiddo's a lot younger than yours, so his capabilities are pretty hamstrung at this point because he just can't do too much. But I'm actually
everything. A little cry.
That's
here
the
and
part
there,
that is incredible.
A smile keeps
and you're
machine
decoding.
On.
Yeah, I said to someone the other day, he's so cute. I will put up with more because he's cute. And I actually think there's like a parallel lesson in that is a good rapport with your business partner in a performance deal can overcome the biggest of bumps. Poor rapport on a great, call it economics or structured deal, it will still kill the deal. Like the vast majority of people do want to make money, but very few people are actually going to throw you under the bus for it. There is a handful of those people. The better you are at filtering them out, which is difficult, the better it is for you. But understanding that element of rapport and both good intent and a desire to make things right, like a willingness, not just spoken, but like, hey man, like I wish you told me about this sooner. I'm so sorry about that. And meaning it. What can we do to get back on track? I had a friend, well, I still have a friend, but he was involved in a deal years ago in the music industry. Very big deal. He's been in the music industry at this point for 40 odd years, right? And another friend was on the deal with him. And this other friend would say it was incredible. Every time things felt like they were breaking down in this deal, the negotiation, the performance, whatever, the older guy would basically just say, hey, guys, like, I feel like everything's kind of getting off track here. And I don't feel like this is what we wanted. What can I do to help? And he would just come in with this pure, what can I do to make things right? And it was incredible how it would just turn things around. Because I do think that in all deals, it's very easy for it to become political, emotional, psychological, whatever, and forget like, hey, we're actually on the same team. If we put our ingredients together, or your ingredients and my mechanisms, whatever, we can make a really big impact for a lot of people. We can make a lot of money. It can be sustainable and it can be enjoyable. And I think it's so easy to forget that when a little slight occurs. Like you do have to be able to manage your relationship to successfully do deals. I really believe that.
Well, people end up, the chance of people moving along the same pace at the same time, with the same needs are rare. I call that picking the train back up and putting it back on the track. So if you're working with a client and they're starting to have a downer or they get unsure what's happening, just walk them back to the last time they were on the track. Like, why did you decide to go on this journey? What was the result you were hoping for? And we agree that's still what they want. We pick them up, get them back on the track, and off we go again. And it's inevitable the train will fall off the track occasionally, and you just pick it up and put it back on.
I think there's something to be said as well for this dynamic of where is the boundary. So are you familiar with a guy called Henry Cloud?
No.
Okay, Henry Cloud, I think he was a pastor originally, and he wrote two books. One is called Necessary Endings, and the other one is called Boundaries. And they're very heavy on the religion side of things, but they don't, and I'm saying this to anyone who's not overly religious but likes the ideas, they don't lose the message for the content. And he has this really great point about boundaries and this really great point about necessary endings. So in boundaries, the idea is being very clear. If you and I live next door to each other and we have a fence around our property and the tree in your backyard falls into my backyard, whose responsibility is it? And it's yours because it's your tree. And I can turn to you and I can say, James, listen, man, big storm, tree fell over into the backyard. Can you get rid of your tree, please? Or I can offer to help you. It's up to me what I do with the stuff in my boundaries, but it's yours to take care of. And likewise with necessary endings, he provides this metaphor of like trimming a rose bush. The way that you make any plant grow is you trim off the stuff that doesn't work so that the nutrients only flow to the good spots. And I think this is part of the almost detached element of managing a relationship is I have to be close enough to you if we're collaborating to understand you and work with you, but I have to be far enough away that I can protect myself and do what's best for me and my people and my resources, my area. And it's a bit of a dance. And what I'd say is to anyone who's listening to this and is interested in performance deals, understand that there are many ways to cut it. And you have weaknesses. There's a guy called Jack Skeen. You come across this guy, the psychologist? He does what you and I were already talking about, finding the right path for you. And I'm going to mispronounce this guy's name, Prabhai. I think is his last name, the investor out of India. And he hired Jack Skeen when he was about to do some giant chemical company or grow some giant chemical company. And they turned to him and were like, mate, you're miserable working with all these people. Why would you do that? And now Prabhai's got this like tiny one-man band kind of thing. Anyway, the reason I bring that up is when going into deals, it's very sexy to be like, oh, deals, money, how highly leveraged, asymmetry. Oh, wow, this is so cool. But the people I've seen be most successful in deals are incredibly, incredibly picky, right? Like doing a deal's not hard. I texted this to you on Instagram. All you do is tell someone, I'll do all the work. You take the lion's share of the money. How can you say no to that, right? Like it's a no-brainer. But a lot of the time, because it's so easy to get a yes, you fail to think, one, do I want to still be doing a deal with this person in 5 years, right? Like a collaborative deal. Two, is this even a deal worth doing? Like, is there meat on the bone? And because you hear the success stories of deals that took off, it's like easy to convince yourself that you can turn shit into sugar. You probably can't. The truth is you are looking to walk into something that should be better, that has succeeded to its current level in spite of itself. And you can pour gasoline on the fire in your own special brand. And finally, you also need to have a willing participant. Like there is a deal at the moment that I'm wanting to put together. I want to see this person succeed. She has written an amazing book. I have recommended it to a lot of people. I think she could just flourish. One, I don't know if it is in her sort of values or interest to grow that publishing side of her life. And two, I don't actually know if we would even get along. But I would love to connect her with someone who would just blow her up. I think that would just be so valuable because the material she has is so great. But if she doesn't want to do the deal, if she doesn't want to get involved, or if she wants to do her own, I can't change that. Yeah, I can try and influence her, I can try and suggest things. But to almost go full circle back to that older gentleman I mentioned earlier in the music industry, he once gave me this line, which I've thought on constantly, which is you cannot drag someone across the finish line. Like, we've heard it in
Well, you
variations. Matt
can't
Smith
steer a
used to
parked
say,
car.
you can't steer a parked car. Yeah, like it's got to be in motion. It's got to
What's
have that energy. It's got to have that want.
so was that the one that broke down you were talking about?
No.
Because
That's
we
not the
didn't
deal that
finish
broke
that, and
down.
if we don't,
Ah, sorry.
someone was going to email me and say, James, you cut him off and then never asked him
No,
what
no, no.
happened.
Are you talking about the medical publishing deal?
The one that you
I would
said,
just
yeah,
say,
it just sort of broke down.
yeah. Look, that was two people, I believe, with very different goals, ambitions, desires, and egos, and very different scorecards for determining the success of that venture and the relationship, and different hierarchies of needs. This is me trying to speak about it from the most mature, relaxed position possible.
It's
And
hard
look,
to
it was
speak
a long
about
time ago.
failed deals. So my worst failed deal, I think it's almost too embarrassing to mention, but I think we went for 11 months without reaching the threshold where I get paid. Even though I tried, there was a major issue, and that was that the partners team was just too small. He just couldn't implement. And we had COVID, and they stopped running in-person events. So like a massive change to the business model. At 11 months, I gave 30 days notice. I said, look, this isn't really going to work for me because we've worked this out on what the average of the business was doing, but it's gone backwards so much. And now we're getting back to where you're at, probably through my help, mind you. So I actually helped through a really difficult, like shitty time in the market. I got it back to where it was before the start of all the bullshit. And I got paid on the very last month, like a little. It went over on the last 30 days
Just
after I
tipped.
gave notice. It went over, but
Yeah.
this was the kicker. The partner said, like ultimately, if we were to add $1 million a year or whatever, and I was on a 10% deal, he said I wouldn't be comfortable paying you $100,000. If we made an extra $1 million. I said, well, and why would that be? Like, if you've made an extra 900. Wouldn't $100,000 be a good deal? He goes, no, I don't know if we'll be able to sort of tie it back to things you've done or whatever. And I'm like, we should never have been in this deal a year ago. Like, this is not how these deals work, bro. And so that was my worst one. And even before that, I'd worked a long time. I actually invented part of that business and built it up pretty strong before we went into the performance deal. Like, I set my own bar high before I started. So there's a lesson in that. I do take a leaf from the car industry, and I do test drive and demo before I'll go to the partnership phase. But if you do it for too long, you're actually moving your bar too much. So don't do it for too long, because you're going to set the bar much higher where you kick off. So that's sort of it's getting the timing right. Enough proof of concepts to know that it's not a fluke, but not so long that you've set the bar high to start with. Or you can negotiate a lower bar point and start getting paid from the beginning if you're clever, but I'm not that clever.
I would say this is very quick because we've got to wrap up in a sec, I know. Harvey Brody. Ever heard of Harvey Brody? You're probably one of the few people who may have. All right. Harvey Brody apparently is the guy that Jay Abraham sat at the feet of all those years ago and picked up some of this toll position stuff from. And he had a thing called the Zoom Spout Oiler. Basically, the story goes that Brody was fixing typewriters, frustrated by having to pull apart the typewriter, put it back together, invented this plastic container for a very specific lubricant for typewriters, and you could stretch it out and get into the hard-to-reach place. And because of his understanding of manufacturing and molds, and you can dig up some material from him, he would license his material. And I think this is maybe what is missing in the framework for performance deals is licensing. Is thinking it very specifically like licensing. I'm going to license you the right to manufacture my Zoom Spout Oiler.
That's what my contract says. It's a royalty agreement, and I'm granting a license.
On your IP, right?
Yeah, the use of the IP. So I feel like I've got that dialed. It's very interesting to hear where Abraham got that from, because I haven't ever heard of.
Allegedly, I don't know for certain. I just want to be really clear. This is something I picked up along the road.
I love to trace things right back to the source. Like I can spot.
Yeah.
I got 20-year-olds pitching me now in my inbox, trying to sell me stuff that I brought to the market 10 years ago, and I know where it came from.
Yeah.
Like it's fascinating how things can be lost.
Cyclical.
So probably the beer acronym came from somewhere. I don't know who to credit for that other than Lloyd Thompson. So
that goes back to the psychology. It's still the same stuff forever. We're all going to solve the same stuff in new ways.
So final thoughts from my perspective, and I'll ask you in a sec, Rob. It's the psychology of us as a founder is really going to reflect across our business. And the psychology comes into play when we're choosing a partner on a performance deal. It's actually far more critical because you're basically in a business marriage. It should be viewed as a long term. It's easy to get into, hard to get out of, or easy to get out of, but for no real profit. So you really have to be super picky. That's probably the core takeaway that I take from this is you have to be so picky because you want to be the force multiplier, not the actual success ingredient. That's a huge takeaway. What about your points, Rob?
Yeah, I would say ask yourself in your business, what is it telling you about yourself? Right? Just take time, even if it's half an hour is all you can squeeze out a week, just ask yourself, what is my business showing me about me? And that guy you mentioned before, I can't remember the specifics, but wanted to build a big business. And it's like, maybe you just prefer a one-man business. And then you can make decisions about how do I get the economics juiced. So that's the first part. And then understanding if you're comfortable saying, I live with cognitive distortions, understand so does everyone else. And while you might be excited about the prospect of a performance deal, doubt it. Doubt it completely. Make yourself the buyer of a performance deal, not the seller of it. And I think if only to create a bit of a handbrake on your own optimism, it doesn't mean be skeptical, just a little bit of a handbrake on your optimism. Because again, as you said, they're easy to get into. They can be very emotional and heart-wrenching to get out of, but they can also be easy to get out of with no profit. Like you're doing it because it makes more money than a retainer would. And I think that actually should be a really clear thing is if you have an agency, if you have a service business, if you have a established fee or fee range that you charge, make sure any performance deal you do is at least 20 to 50% above that at a worst case scenario, because otherwise you're not reaching your own hurdle, and find another way to get compensated.
Plus also you're blocking yourself from being an affiliate with competitors. There is a downside to it. You're like some of the performance deals where they're marginal to a mentor fee. It's like now I can't promote someone else's product. I don't want to compete with them, etc. So there's that side of it. I'd say get yourself a Chad. To your point before, I've been training in the gym 2 days a week for 1 year.
Yeah.
I've put on about 6 kilograms of lean muscle mass, and I have never been injured because I have Chad.
Perfect.
He's my personal trainer, and he supervises my technique. He knows exactly what weights, what exercises to build me into the perfect strength, and that's like basically get some help. If you like this episode, you want some help from Rob, or you want some help from me, get in touch with us. Rob, where do we get in touch with you?
I mean, still the best place is on Instagram. I love Instagram. I know I'm technically not meant to, and I'm meant to be above that or whatever, but send me a message on Instagram. I see everything.
Hanley, Hanley.
Yeah, ROB. That's it. Just, excuse me, hit me up there or send an email to rob@robhanley.com. I admit I'm not as great on email. That's why James and I were able to arrange this podcast so quickly.
On Instagram, and here we are a day later.
Always better. Always better.
Yeah, thanks,
exactly.
Rob, so much.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I just really want to support your statement. Find the people that you like to listen to. If you've been listening to the podcast, I mean, what'd you say, 1,000 and something episodes now? 1,060 something?
1,092.
1,092. If you have listened to even 50% of these podcasts, you obviously like what James has to say. You obviously admire him and you're open to it. And maybe there's something where you're like, do I need to pay for someone or whatever? But I would say, like, I've known James, God, I think we first met in either 2011 or 2012, right? We've known each other for a long time. And again, I'm breaking convention. I'm not meant to spook someone else, and James didn't ask me to do this.
But here to spook me.
Yeah, exactly, right.
I'll just sit back and shut up.
You'll allow it. But I think there's something to be said for the fact that more often than not, especially in an industry that relies heavily on what's working now, experience and perspective, as James said about having someone who's been through the trenches. Like, it is worth working with people you admire, if only to osmotically get in contact with them and to learn from their experiences, or to learn that maybe don't meet your heroes. I know that I love doing turnarounds, and I know that some people who have worked with me have been very disappointed with me, either because I'm angry or arrogant or frustrating in their perspective. And that's totally fine. They're allowed to see me that way. But I also know that those people benefited from working with me no matter what. So if you are thinking about this, if you've been thinking about it for any period of time, ask yourself, why would a bloke who's never done business with James keep coming back and having conversations with him over the course of 12 years? I obviously like the guy. I think there's something to be learned from him. And you can hear from the way that he talks, he has a unique perspective. And if you have good clay, maybe he can help you. And maybe he can't, but nothing ventured, nothing gained. So I'm spooking you at the end of your podcast because I have chosen to. That is very clear. This is not a paid arrangement.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And the reason you're here is because, we had such a good run of episodes before and we wanted you back, Rob. Hopefully you'll be back in the future as well.
Sounds good. Cheers. All right, mate. Take care of yourself. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Goodbye.
This is James Schramko.